3 spine-chilling true rainy night encounters exposed, haunting tales of sinister horror. The night was alive with the cacophony of relentless rain slapping against the windows, a rhythm that seemed to mock Hannah's solitude. She gripped the edge of the porch, heart thumping as the wind howled like a banshee outside. The storm looked more like a monster than a weather event, flinging its wrath against the small Midwestern town. Alone, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing on her chest, a suffocating reminder of her estranged husband working late, leaving her with their 2 young children, Ella and Max. Hannah stepped outside to grab the mail, but her heart skipped a beat when she noticed 3 notes taped to the door. The first was scrawled hastily, reading, "I see you." A cold chill skittered down her spine. The second detailed their dinner from that night, spaghetti again, right? The final note turned her blood to ice. "Ella's favorite story is The Very Hungry Caterpillar I'll Be Watching." Panic enveloped her, gripping her like a vice. At first, she dismissed them. Just kids being dumb, she muttered under her breath, but as the thunder rumbled louder, a sinking feeling settled in her gut like a stone. This wasn't some silly prank. The power flickered, hinting at the darkness that enveloped her world, and then it was gone. The house sank into a suffocating silence, shattered only by the whispering of raindrops and unsettling creaks from the corners, shadows dancing menacingly. With each clap of thunder, Hannah flicked her gaze toward the windows, heart racing. Fear twisted inside, tight and gnawing. Her phone offered no solace, the signal swallowed by the storm. The room constricted, the familiar warmth morphing into a cage, shadows stretching with a will of their own. Something lurked just beyond sight, and the notes coiled tighter around her heart. Before she could formulate any plan, a crash echoed through the kitchen, slamming the door to dread wide open. Ella and Max clung to her side, their wide eyes reflecting pure terror. "Stay close," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling as they inched toward the source of the sound. Was it a homespun ghost? Or something more sinister? Every instinct screamed that it was not just a benign noise but something threatening. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Hannah's breath quickened. The sounds grew louder, closer. The reality of the notes crashed over her like the storm outside. They knew her family, they knew her life. The recently released convict's identity pierced her mind. Hadn't he volunteered at the school? Hadn't she seen him on their street, smiling too widely, as if hiding something underneath? Her hands trembled, and panic threatened to swallow her whole. "Mommy, I'm scared," Max whimpered beside her. The floorboards creaked again, and adrenaline shot through her veins. This was no time for fear. Should she barricade herself within the flimsy walls or flee into the storm's grasp? Her decision hung heavy as the footsteps crept ever closer, the sound echoing her name with a chilling familiarity. As Hannah braced herself, knowing she would have to confront whatever lurked in the shadows, the thunder clapped violently outside, a harbinger of the dark secrets yet to be revealed. The night was far from over, and she was about to discover just how close the danger truly was. The door slammed open, its hinges shrieking as if in protest. Hannah's heart raced like a wild animal trapped in a cage. She pressed her children tightly against her, shielding them with her body. No longer could she dismiss the moment as just a figment of her imagination. The terror was real, palpable, descending upon them like a thick fog. "Stay behind me," she urged, her voice barely a whisper. Ella's tiny hands gripped the back of Hannah's shirt, and Max buried his face into her side, both of them trembling. The storm continued to rage outside, but the chaos within the house felt far more threatening. In the dim light flickering from the barely functioning lamp, shadows writhed against the walls. The air turned heavy, thick with dread as a low, guttural sound echoed from the kitchen, the sound of someone, or something, breathing. Hannah leaned in closer to the children, praying that whatever was lurking would just go back to the depths from where it came. Then she heard a soft, sinister chuckle. It sent shivers cascading down her spine. Chilling memories flooded her mind, memories attached to the name that haunted her thoughts, the released convict. He had made it perfectly clear that he was watching. "Ella, Max, I need you to be quiet," Hannah instructed, her voice hoarse. They nodded, wide-eyed and white as sheets. They huddled together as one, trying desperately to drown out the reality around them with the safety of their mother. The floor creaked again. It was getting louder, closer. Hannah mustered the courage and made her way cautiously towards the kitchen, her heartbeat drumming a frantic rhythm in her ears. Each step felt like an eternity. She could just barely glimpse the form of her dining chair overturned on the floor. Something shifted in the kitchen, a shadow outside, the faint slice of light spilling from the hallway. "Who's there?" she called out, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. Silence answered her, thick and suffocating. But then the childish laughter echoed again, bright and mocking. In a moment of impulsive courage, she rushed to the light switch, flicking it on. The room was washed in stark brightness, illuminating the chaos: broken dishes, chairs on their sides, and nothing. An empty kitchen stared back at her, but she felt a presence lingering, as if it could leap upon them without warning. Panic swirled inside her as she turned to Ella and Max. "We need to get to the car," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. If they could just get to safety. But before she could make a move, a gust of cold wind slammed the back door open, sending it crashing against the wall. Hannah gasped, and instinctively pulled her children closer. "Run!" she shouted. The three of them bolted for the door just as a sizable figure emerged from the kitchen, cloaked in shadow. Hannah barely had time to register a face obscured by darkness before she felt icy fingers brush against her wrist. She flung herself toward the door, pulling Ella and Max behind her, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever horror trailed them. But as she crossed the threshold, Eva's terrified scream shattered the night, echoing through the wild storm and leaving Hannah frozen in her tracks. "Mommy!" Hannah's heart split in two, a scream stuck in her throat as she turned back to the suffocating darkness. Every instinct told her to flee, but all she could hear was Ella's panicked calls, and the feeling of that same cold breath inching closer, closer. Her instinct screamed to run into the storm, to escape the choking grasp of that night, but deep, echoing laughter followed her like a predator, growing louder. Could she save her children and escape the nightmare? What price would she have to pay to break free from the shadows that taunted her? Hannah's gut twisted as she heard the cry echoing in her mind, drowning her in dread. Panic surged through her veins, sharpening her senses even as time seemed to slow. The silence that followed felt alive, creeping around her as if it were a serpent ready to strike. "Eva!" she called, but the name barely left her lips before the dread thickened. She could feel the presence pulling, urging her forward while the laughter haunted her. The shadows flickered around them, shifting and convulsing, whipping through the air like restless spirits. "Mommy, please!" Ella whimpered, her voice trembling. Hannah couldn't leave Eva. She couldn't. Terror clawed at her heart, battling the instinct to protect Ella and Max. With a determined jerk, she pulled them back into the house just as the wind gusted violently, rattling the framed photos on the walls. "Stay close," she hissed, inching toward the hallway where the sound had originated. Every step echoed in her head, heavy and foreboding. Hannah could still hear that laughter. A malevolent sound, echoing through the shadows, wrapping around her like a vine. It seeped into her bones, urging her to find her daughter. If only she could move faster. "Eva!" she yelled again, the desperation rising in her throat. A shiver ran down her back as she crossed into the hallway, the lights flickering ominously above. Each beat of her heart mirrored the fading sound of those playful chuckles, weaving in and out of reality. "Mommy!" A muffled cry. It was coming from the basement. In that moment, the basement door creaked open slightly, almost invitingly. The storm roared outside, and with it, her breath turned to ice. Hannah faltered, fear gripping her as the laughter morphed to something more mournful. The shadows clung to the walls like something from a nightmare, writhing as if waiting. "Do we go?" Max asked, his tiny voice brave yet shaking. "No." She clutched her children, feeling their small bodies quiver against her side. "We can't. We have to find Eva." Slowly, Hannah took a step toward the door. The air grew colder, and she could almost taste the fear that lingered. The rain battered against the roof, a chaotic rhythm that made the house seem alive and threatening. "Hold on to me," Hannah instructed, forcing her voice to stay steady. They shuffled closer together, stepping into the hall where the darkness loomed like a creature ready to pounce. The laughter faded, replaced by something worse: silence, heavy and thick. "Mommy." Eva's voice cracked again, sharper, more urgent. "Stay here," Hannah commanded, pushing Max and Ella behind her. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the pull of their writhing shadows. With each uprising step, her heart thundered, amplifying the fear lurking just beyond her sight. She approached the basement door, its hinges squeaking ominously as Hannah swung it open. The black abyss awaited her, ready to swallow her whole. Flickering shadows danced on the wall as she took one tentative step down. Suddenly, the laughter erupted again, but now morphed into chilling screams and anguished chorus that pulsed with dread. It was not just Eva. There were other voices, dark and desperate. "Stop." The command slipped from her lips as her resolve weakened. She turned, ready to gather her children and escape, but a figure materialized at the top of the stairs, cloaked in the gloom. "Stay." It rasped, the word chilling her to the bone. The face remained obscured, yet she felt its presence wrapping around her, suffocating. Hannah's breath quickened. She had to make a choice. Could she conquer the darkness to save her children? Or would she become another echo in the storm? A crack of thunder roared outside, shaking the walls and shaking her resolve. As the figure stepped forward, Hannah's world shattered. The figure loomed, its presence dark and oppressive, as if the shadows themselves had taken form. Hannah felt the weight of its gaze, heavy and suffocating. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, each beat a warning, a pulse of pure terror. "Mommy." Eva's voice echoed again, small and frightened, but indistinct, muffled by the growing storm in the basement. It churned with darkness, the air thickening as the cries twisted into haunting whispers. "Eva!" Hannah shouted, her voice breaking. She took a step forward, but her limbs felt unyielding, as though the fear itself had wrapped around her like chains. The figure at the top of the stairs moved, coaxing shadows to crawl forth, twisting the familiar into something grotesque. "Stay." It rasped again. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Deep down, Hannah felt a thread of recognition weaving through her fear. She dared a glance at Max and Ella, their eyes wide with panic. She couldn't lose them. "Not now. We have to go, now." She forced out, tearing her eyes from the figure to focus on her children. But the shadows were relentless, swaying like a living thing, pulling her back toward the basement. In a frantic surge, Hannah stepped closer to Max and Ella, gathering them tight against her. "Run. Just run," she shouted, the urgency pushing her voice to a desperate pitch. The basement beckoned behind her, a gaping maw hungry for souls, but she couldn't let it win. With instinct triumphing over terror, she flung herself toward the living room, the children in tow. They raced through the darkness, the echoes of sinister laughter crescendoing behind them. Hannah's mind raced a suffocating loop of thoughts and fears. What had happened to Eva? What was that thing? An ice-cold gust of wind blasted through the house, extinguishing the flickering candle flames and plunging them deeper into darkness. In that moment, Ella screamed, breaking the silence. "Mommy! It's coming!" Hannah whipped around, eyes darting wildly. The figure now stood at the entrance of the hallway, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to expand, consuming the space before it. "Stay," it commanded, voice like gravel and ash, reverberating through her very core. "Don't listen. Keep running." Hannah grabbed the children's hands, pulling them toward the kitchen. In the back of her mind, dread clawed at her thoughts, the sensation of being watched growing more profound. She stumbled into the room, scanning for a way out. The back door was locked, and the windows were sealed tight against the storm. Panic surged as she pressed against the door, searching frantically for an option, any option, but the oppressive darkness felt insurmountable. Another chilling laugh burst forth, echoing through the kitchen. It wasn't just laughter, it felt like a taunt. The shadows coiled tighter, suffocating any fragment of hope she clung to. "Mommy!" Max cried, his tiny voice breaking through the chaos, real and desperate. "I can't breathe." Hannah turned to him, sheer horror gripping her. "I know. Just hold on." She tried to comfort him, but how could she promise safety when she felt so trapped? The kitchen felt like a cage, with the walls whispering dread choking her with every breath. The figure stepped closer, eyes glinting in the darkness, predatory yet strangely familiar. She felt a tremor run through her. "Hannah," it whispered, voice laced with a chilling familiarity. Her blood ran cold. She recognized the name, a name that had haunted her, a name that belonged to her. Hannah's throat tightened, the truth setting in like a ton of bricks. The figure advancing toward her was no stranger. It was a mirror reflecting her worst fears, a twisted version of her. Was this who she was becoming? With the shrill sound of thunder shattering the night, she made a choice. Turning to her children, she screamed, "We fight. Together." But as she faced the monstrosity that was herself, Hannah couldn't help but wonder if they would survive the night or if they would join the echoes that haunted the shadows forever. Just then, the darkness surged with a new force, beckoning. Something or someone out of the basement. Something that knew their names. What awaited them would challenge everything they held dear. The air crackled, thick with fear and anticipation as the shadows stirred with purpose, inching closer like a tidal wave. Hannah's heart thundered in her chest as the kitchen walls felt like they were closing in. She glanced back at her children, their faces pale and terrified, and she fought back the overwhelming sensation that her very essence was being stripped away. "Fight! We have to fight!" She urged them, though her own voice trembled. The familiar figure loomed, its form twisting grotesquely, every feature a dark reminder of the worst parts of herself. It wore a smile that chilled her to the bone, an imitation of comfort, yet filled with malice. "You think you can escape?" It rasped, each syllable dripping with mockery. Shadows danced eagerly around it, as if waiting for her to falter. "Shut up!" Hannah screamed, the words bursting from her like a dam breaking. She clutched both kids tight, desperate to shield them from this horror that felt as if it were ripped from her very soul. "Max, Ella, stay close." But the kitchen was teeming with darkness, an entity of its own that began to flicker and pulse. The lights overhead buzzed ominously, dimming and brightening in a disorienting dance, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The figure lunged forward, the air thickening with dread as Hannah stumbled backward, desperately looking for an escape. Outside, the storm raged, thunder pounding like a war drum, lightning illuminating the shadows in stark flashes. For a fleeting moment, the monstrous figure vanished, swallowed by darkness, and Hannah seized that tiny spark of hope. "Through the pantry!" she shouted, shoving her children ahead of her. They dashed into the pantry, the door creaking as they squeezed into the cramped space, barely breathing. The shelves were lined with dusty jars, remnants of a forgotten life. But footsteps heavy and deliberate tapped against the kitchen floor, drawing closer. The sound was deliberate, almost taunting, as if the figure was toying with them. "Is it gone?" Max's tiny voice quivered in the dark. "I don't know." Hannah hissed, panic clawing at her throat. She pressed her ear against the door, listening, straining for any sign of movement. The house whispered secrets, the floorboards creaking like they were sharing tales of despair. Suddenly, the darkness pressed closer, spilling through the crack around the door like liquid shadow. It beckoned, seductive and sinister. "Hannah," it coaxed, motherly yet perverse. "Why hide? Come out, let us play." "No." Hannah shouted, the word ripped from her throat. She felt the pull of the shadows, knew they wanted to drag her back into despair. Stay with me. She whispered to her children, the fight within her igniting. Then, with a horrifying crash, the pantry door burst open. Light flooded and the kitchen transformed, revealing a kaleidoscope of twisted laughter and shadows that froze in time. Hannah could see the figure, its familiar face twisted in a parody of her own, a creature born of every regret and fear she harbored. "Mommy!" Ella squealed as she stumbled, falling to the floor. Without thinking, Hannah lunged forward, grasping Ella's hand and yanking her upright. "Run!" Hannah shouted again, this time fear igniting a ferocity she didn't know she had. They bolted past the desolation that was their home, the living room stretching out infinitely, mocking them with its disarray, yet the darkness flooded after them, a storm of shadows swirling and swirling. Each wave threatened to swallow them whole. Hannah could feel its icy fingers ghosting along her back, urging her to succumb. "Keep going!" she yelled, but the figure was relentless. It could not be outrun, no matter how fast her feet moved. Just then, she caught sight of the staircase that led up into the light, a sliver of hope in a nightmarish maze. "We can make it!" she screamed, leading her children toward the stairs. But as they reached the first step, the laughter surged, the shadows reaching out, clawing at the fabric of their reality. "Don't stop!" she shouted again, desperately dragging Max and Ella up, as the figure shrieked behind them, a sound that clawed at her soul, echoing her deepest fears. In that frantic moment, Hannah realized with growing dread their escape might not mean freedom after all. Was the darkness merely playing a different game? What if it was already in their hearts? As they reached the top of the stairs, Hannah paused, half expecting the shadows to engulf them, to close the door to escape forever. But something even worse lurked above, waiting in the very space she had dared to flee towards. Something that could change everything they thought they knew. "Please, no," she whispered, as that familiar echo returned, chilling her to the core. What awaited at the top would confront not just their lives but the very essence of who they thought they were. The stairs creaked underfoot, each step a reminder of their impending doom, as Hannah pulled her children along, heart racing. The hallway stretched out before them, bathed in flickering light, revealing more shadowy corners than ever before. Each flicker of illumination cast sinister shapes on the walls, as if gnarled fingers were reaching out to snatch them back into the dark. Hannah swung the kids into a small alcove, heart pounding like a drum. "Wait here," she commanded, though her trembling voice barely conveyed the authority she wished it had. She peeked around the corner, dread pooling in her stomach like a heavy stone. The figure loomed at the bottom of the stairs, mouth curled in a twisted semblance of warmth, but eyes that glowed with cold malice. It scanned the upper landing, searching for them. "Mommy, I'm scared," Ella whimpered, clutching Max tight. Hannah's instincts screamed at her to comfort them, to shield them from their fear, yet at the same time, she sensed the weight of a darkness lurking behind her, a presence that felt like a heavy fog suffocating her very breath. "There's no time for that. We have to move," she whispered, bracing herself for whatever came next. The darkness felt almost alive, pulsing at the edges of her vision, waiting for a moment to consume them. With her heart racing, Hannah turned back, gripping the hand of each child tightly. "We need to find a place to hide. Quickly." They slipped into a room at the end of the hallway. Dust hung thick in the air, and the ominous quiet wrapped around them. The cold creak of the old wooden floorboards joined the desperate thump of their heartbeats, echoing her growing fear. She scanned the room, filled with old furniture covered in sheets, remnants of lives long past. Then, an icy draft swept through the room, sending shivers down her spine. The shadows danced, swelling ominously as if urging her to leave. Her breath caught in her throat when she spotted a large mirror draped in cloth. She hesitated, knowing mirrors sometimes reveal what the eyes cannot see. "Stay put," she warned the children, kneeling to yank the cloth away from the mirror. An unsettling reflection stared back her own face, pale and drawn, marked by a thin sheen of sweat. But behind her, there was something else, a dark, swirling mass beginning to take shape. It was the same figure, distorted and monstrous, weights just beyond her eyesight, taunting her every move. "Mommy?" Max whispered. His small voice cracked, trembling with undeniable fear. Hannah glanced quickly to the door, heart racing again as she saw the light flickering more violently. The creature was edging closer, drawn to the awareness of lingering life. "No!" she exclaimed. "Stay back." The kids pressed closer, fear radiating off of them like heat. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, summoning strength. "This has to end," she muttered under her breath, panic bubbling within her. In that moment of desperation, she lunged for the mirror, clutching its frame as though it were a lifeline. "We are leaving!" Hannah shouted, more fierce than she felt. She needed to find a way out, some secret within this house that would release them, yet every fiber of her being trembled against the idea of what lay beyond. Just as she started to pull the children back, the mirror trembled violently, a fissure cracking across its once smooth surface. "Hannah!" It called, a chorus of whispered voices echoing, blending in with her own fear, mingling with her own regret. The shadows inched closer, merging with the figures in the mirror, their cold tendrils reaching out, grasping. With a shriek, Hannah ripped herself away, dragging her children toward the door. As she burst out into the hallway, she felt warmth slip through her fingers. Max's hand was slipping away. "No!" she screamed, fear piercing through her resolve. She lunged, grabbing his wrist just in time. The moment seemed to stretch in a terrifying void. "We have to stick together," she yelled, pulling them close as shadows swirled. But even as they sprinted, an unsettling truth formed in her mind. Was there safety a mere illusion, a flickering hope fading into nothingness? They darted down the hall, the walls closing in. Hannah felt the weight of despair settle on her chest, the echoing laughter taunting them, and she wondered if they ran toward freedom or further into despair. What awaited them at the end of the corridor only deepened her dread, as they drew closer to the source of that familiar echo, that foreboding sound she had been trying to escape. Were the shadows searching for someone or something far worse than they ever imagined? The hallway twisted and turned like a serpent, each step resonating with the echo of their footfalls. The flickering lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with Hannah's racing heart, as if to mock their desperate flight. She clutched her children, sweat beading on her forehead, the oppressive air thick with dread. "Mommy, where are we going?" Ella's voice trembled, a small whisper lost in the dark. Hannah turned to reassure her, but the words caught in her throat. The shadows seemed to dance around them, alive, mocking their fear. "We'll find a way out," she promised, though her voice wavered. Doubt gnawed at her insides. They had to keep moving. Stillness would only bring the figure closer. Another icy gust swept through the hallway, sending chills crawling up her spine. Hannah squared her shoulders and pulled her children closer. "Keep your eyes open. Don't look away from me." As they hurried on, the noises grew louder, the soft scrape of something ominous dragging, whispers forming unspeakable threats. They rounded a corner, plunging into an even darker segment of the corridor. The air thickened, pressing down on them like a weight, and Hannah's breath quickened. Then, a sudden silence enveloped them. No creaking floors, no whispers, just an oppressive quiet that felt wrong. Hannah froze, instinctively shielding Max and Ella with her body. A feeling of dread wrapped around her like a vice, squeezing the breath from her lungs. "Mommy?" Max's voice broke the stillness, high and fearful. "Shush," she hissed, her eyes darting around. She could hear it then, a soft, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat echoing in the void. With every beat, the shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally toward them. "We need to find a safe place," panic flared within her as she fumbled down the hallway, instinct pushing her forward. There. A door loomed ahead, slightly ajar, the faintest glimmer of light spilling from its edges. Hannah bolted toward it, praying it wasn't another trap. She shoved the door open and dragged her children inside. The room was filled with a pungent smell, something rotting and sour. As she steadied her breath, the disarray revealed itself: old furniture, shattered glass, and a large, ornate trunk sitting in the far corner. "Stay close," she urged, moving quickly to examine the trunk. Maybe there was something inside that could help them escape, something that could turn the tide against the dark desperation closing around them. Kneeling down, she reached for the latch. It was cold and damp under her fingers, as if the trunk had absorbed years of fear. "Mommy, I don't want to be here," Ella cried, her eyes wide, pools of sheer terror. "Hush, just a moment, okay?" Hannah shot back, heart racing. As she lifted the latch, the trunk creaked ominously. She hesitated, feeling the air grow even colder. Suddenly, a slithering sound emerged from the hallway. The soft whispering escalated to a thunderous cacophony, echoing their names, and Hannah's heart sank. "We need to go," she shouted, the decision brutal yet immediate. She thrust the trunk closed, feeling an instinctive urge to flee. "No! I heard it!" Ella screamed, pointing behind her. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, twisting and contorting, its eyes locking onto them. The figure smiled a grotesque, inhuman grin. "You're still here," it hissed, advancing. With a primal instinct, Hannah grabbed Max and Ella, yanking them back into the darkness, their cries echoing like a haunting lament behind her. As they scrambled, the door groaned under strain, the world beyond cloaked in malevolence. Where could they possibly go? Forced into the narrow confines of the hallway again, Hannah's mind spun frantically. There had to be a way out, but each direction felt like a descent into hell. What awaited them at the end of the corridor came closer, a glimmer of hope wrapped in monstrous dread. Was there a choice to be made, or were they already ensnared in a game far older and darker than they could comprehend? The shadows whispered malicious secrets, and Hannah realized that to escape, she might have to confront a terrifying truth about what was hunting them. They ran, hearts pounding, the acrid scent of fear sharp in Hannah's nostrils. The darkness seemed alive, snapping at their heels. She could feel the weight of the figure's gaze, a cold, unsettling pressure that pressed against her back. "Faster!" she urged, trying to whip the children into a frantic pace. Max stumbled. "I can't, Mommy," he gasped. The sound of his voice broke her resolve, a sharp pang of panic latching onto her heart. "Come, Max. Please," she yelled, adrenaline fueling her voice. She gripped his hand tighter, pulling him forward as they darted deeper into the hallway. The walls closed in, the flickering lights above now a strobe of terror, illuminating fleeting faces in the shadows, faces that sucked the light from the air. The whispers intensified, echoing their names like a chant, like a promise of doom. Hannah. Ella. Max. It was relentless, a haunting reminder that something followed, something insatiable. "Mommy, what is that?" Ella whimpered, her tiny fingers digging into Hannah's arm. Hannah's gaze shot behind them. Nothing but a void, a thick, inky blackness swallowing the light. Yet she felt it, the creeping sense of malevolence, curling its fingers around her soul, taunting her with promises of despair. "There!" Hannah cried, spotting a door partially wedged open to her right. It felt like a beacon, a slim chance of safety against the encroaching darkness. She pulled her children with all her strength, praying it would lead to an exit. Shoving the door wide, they tumbled into a small room, cluttered with dust and forgotten relics. A single window at the far end cast a weak beam of moonlight. Hannah pressed her back against the door, shutting it tight. She could hear the muffled scrapes of the pursuer on the other side. The whispers morphed into guttural growls, hunger palpable. "Mommy!" Max cried, the terror pooling behind his innocent eyes. "Hold still," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. The shadows outside shifted, and she dared a glance. Nothing. But she knew it lingered. Out there. Waiting. What if it gets us? Ella's words were fragile, a delicate thread on the end of a knife. Hannah knelt to meet their eyes, forcing a brave face despite the cold grip of fear around her heart. "We'll be okay." We just need a moment. Before she could finish, the room shifted beneath her. The floor creaked ominously, and the shadows cast against the walls seemed to stretch. The trunk in the corner, a spectral presence, caught her eye. What if it had something? Something to help them? "No, Mommy, not the trunk." Ella shrieked as if sensing the dark energy radiating from it. But Hannah felt drawn. The latch glimmered faintly in the moonlight. She moved toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her children's protests fell away, drowned in the din of her racing heartbeat. She gripped the cold latch, fingers trembling. "Mommy, please don't." Max begged, terror cracking his voice. "I just need to look," she whispered, barely convincing herself. As she wrestled with the latch, the whispers outside lost their edges, morphing into another voice, deeper, more resonant. "Open it," the voice cooed, sandpaper against her mind. "Unlock the truth." Suddenly, the door rattled, the figure's weight slamming against it as if it were trying to break through. Hannah's heart dropped. Time was running out. Could they risk opening the trunk? What dark secret waited within? The door buckled again. She held her breath, fear and resolve coiling together like a storm, and in that split second, she made her choice. A choice that could seal their fate. What horrors might they unleash? Would this trunk be their salvation or their end? The air rippled with tension as she forced the latch upward, prepared to confront whatever lay within as the door creaked ominously against repeated assaults. The trunk creaked open, a sound that echoed like a death knell through the small room. Dust poured from the hinges, swirling in the moonlight, creating a halo of decay that hung heavy in the air. Hannah's heart raced, each thunderous beat pounding against her skull as she peered inside, hope and dread battling within her. The interior was dark and chaotic, a jumble of old photographs, yellowed papers, and what looked like rusted chains. Her stomach churned. The disarray felt wrong, like remnants of something better left undisturbed. A faint whimper from Max drew her focus back, his face pale as he pressed against Ella, both children wide-eyed and trembling. We shouldn't be here, Mommy." Ella whimpered, her voice trembling, a fragile thread that threatened to snap. "Just a little longer," Hannah urged, fingers trembling as she reached deeper into the trunk. Her mind raced. What if this was a mistake? But the voice from the shadows seemed to call to her, soft and menacing all at once. "Unlock the truth." As her hand brushed against the cold metal of the chains, the room shifted again. A sudden chill swept through the air, sharp and biting. Hannah's breath hitched in her throat, the tension rising like a living entity. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated from outside, making the very walls tremble in response. "Mommy, it's here!" Max screamed, terror wrenching his voice as the noise outside grew louder, more aggressive. Hannah felt the breath catching in her chest, the instinct to protect driving her. The shadows seemed to pulse with life, a monstrous presence preparing to breach the doorway. "Not yet, please." Ella's scream pierced through the chaos, sharp and panicked. But the trunk's contents had called to Hannah, and she couldn't ignore it now. Ignoring the icy dread pooling in her stomach, she pulled out a photo, shaking as she turned it over. It was a picture of a family, their faces twisted in agony, eyes wide with despair. They stood in this very room, having once been alive, unaware of the nightmare that would consume them. The bottom of the photograph was smeared with what looked like dried blood, creating a streak that clashed violently with the smiles frozen above it. "What's that?" Max asked, every word a strained whisper. Hannah dropped the photo, backing away, but the room was no longer still. The door shuddered violently, splinters flying as the figure slammed against it once more. The shadows grew denser, coiling at her feet like serpents hungry for flesh. "Mommy!" Ella cried, her small hands reaching out, pulling at Hannah's jeans, desperate for comfort. "We have to." Hannah started, but the trunk began to tremble, raking through her thoughts as the clatter of chains grew louder. The air thickened, charged with an unseen force, drawing them closer to the chaos. "Open it!" the voice demanded insidiously, now echoing within her mind. "Let the truth in now!" Hannah shouted, fighting back against the compulsion that gripped her heart. This wasn't safety, it was a trap. With frantic breaths and a rising sense of dread, she yanked the lid down on the trunk, the metallic latch slamming shut with a decisive thud, but it was too late. The door buckled once more, and in that moment, it splintered wide. Dark, shadowy tendrils slithered in, swirling around them, threading through the air like smoke. A paralyzing fear gripped Hannah as she realized the shadow wasn't just a pursuer, it was a vessel, drawing them in, craving their very essence. "Run!" she screamed, shoving her children toward the only place left to escape, the little window at the far end of the room. As the dark presence surged forward, a deep, ragged breath echoed, filled with hunger. With her heart hammering, Hannah threw herself into the fray, dragging her children along. But as she reached the window, a whisper drifted back to her, taunting. "Your escape will only feed the darkness." What did that mean? Pushing the thought aside, she squeezed through, desperately searching for the light outside. But deep down, a gnawing fear settled in. Was this just the beginning? Would they ever truly escape? As the shadows clawed at her heels, she could almost hear the echoes of their past, of those who had tried to flee the same darkness. What awaited her beyond those walls? With her heart pounding and the words of the shadow still ringing in her ears, a thought pierced through the chaos: sometimes, running only deepens the threat. The night was far from over. The world outside was a blur of rain and shadows as Hannah pulled herself and her children through the window. She gasped, the cold air hitting her like an icy shock, but there was no time to hesitate. Lightning illuminated their path, the storm raging with furious energy, urging them away from the nightmare that lurked behind. "Run!" she shouted, fear igniting a fierce determination within her. Ella and Max scrambled after her, hearts pounding, adrenaline fueling their small frames. They dashed down the porch steps, slipping in puddles, chasing the flickers of light that shone through the tumultuous storm. Hannah's mind raced, a chaotic jumble of thoughts. She needed to reach the car, their only chance at safety. But as she turned toward the street, something caught her eye, a dark figure lingering just beyond the edge of protection, the silhouette stark against the storm's bluster, watching, always watching. The familiar chill gripped her heart, the shadows stretching toward them like greedy fingers. "Mommy!" Max cried, his voice lost in the roar of the wind. "Stay close," she urged, glancing back at the encroaching darkness that felt like a predatory beast stalking its prey. They sprinted, the car's headlights flickering through the rain, an inviting beacon. Once inside, Hannah slammed the doors shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps, an icy dread seeped into her bones. She turned the key in the ignition, and the engine sputtered before roaring to life. "Buckled up," she ordered, and her children did as they were told, their tiny hands fumbling with seatbelts. "I see it, Mommy." Ella trembled, pointing out the window. Hannah's heart stopped as she saw it, the tall, dark figure standing under a flickering lamppost, its outline twisted and monstrous. The laughter rang in her ears, just a haunting whisper against the storm's howling prey. "Go. Just go," Max urged, his tiny voice trembling with urgency. It broke her just a little. Even in this chaos, his instinct was to want her to take action. With determination coursing through her, Hannah slammed the car into gear. The tires screeched against the slick pavement as she floored the accelerator, speeding away from the shadows and the echoing laughter. The rain pounded against the windshield, creating a chaotic rhythm that matched her racing heart. As they sped through the winding streets, Hannah racked her brain for a sanctuary. The old church on the corner. It had always felt safe, a refuge when the world turned dark. She saw the outline of its tall spire through the sheets of rain and made a sharp turn, praying they could find solace among its ancient walls, but as she approached, her stomach dropped. The church stood silently, a stark figure against the stormy backdrop. No welcoming light, no signs of life, only shadows clinging to its corners like the very darkness that pursued them. Still, she pressed on, guiding the car into the gravel lot, her pulse racing harder than ever. "Mommy, I can't stay in this car," Ella cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know. We need to hurry inside," Hannah said, her voice a mix of fear and reassurance. She led them out of the car, a sense of urgency propelling them forward. They hurried to the church doors, the wood groaning ominously as she pushed them open. The inside was dark but welcoming, thick silence wrapped around them, as if the very walls conspired to keep out the night's horrors. The scent of aged wood and burning candles welcomed them like an embrace. "Mommy," Max whispered, clutching Hannah's hand tightly. "Sure we're safe now," she said, her resolve faltering against a backdrop of doubt. Was this truly safety, or just another trap? They crept into the sanctuary, the flickering candles casting shadows across the pews. As they entered, the door slammed shut behind them with a finality that sent shivers down Hannah's spine. She spun around, eyes wide, the fear curling dangerously tight around her chest, but as she scanned the room, something changed. The heavy air lightened, a warmth washing over them. "Look!" Ella cried, pointing toward the altar. A soft glow radiated from behind the pulpit, beckoning them in a way that felt hauntingly familiar. Is that a light?" Max's voice trembled, but excitement sparkled beneath the surface, a desperate thread of hope. Silently, Hannah led them forward, every step echoed in the stillness, uncertainty swirling around them. As they approached, the light seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of its own, illuminating an old book resting on the altar. Hannah's heart raced. Could it hold the answers she sought, the truth behind the darkness that seemed to unravel everything she loved? "Mommy, what's that?" Max asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Just a moment," she replied, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The shadows lingered in the corners, but they felt diffused, less threatening. Perhaps because this sacred ground had known many hearts, many battles fought against the darkness. Gathering her courage, Hannah reached out and opened the book. The pages flared to life, revealing words steeped in ancient wisdom, the kind of truths that could shatter chains or offer salvation. As she read, the tension clinging to her unwound slightly, breath hitching in her throat. Suddenly, the laughter returned, echoing louder than ever, a chaotic blend of triumph and despair. The shadows surged, lashing against the sanctuary walls, desperate to claw their way inside. Hannah felt the panic rise again. "Stay behind me!" she shouted, instinctively protecting her children from the growing threat. Her heart raced as she closed her eyes, calling forth the strength she hoped was there, within her, but at that moment, she realized something. The shadows would always be there, lurking. They were a part of her, just as she was a part of their story. With every ounce of grit she could muster, she turned to face the darkness, gripping the book like a shield. "You have no power here," she yelled, her voice echoing with conviction through the church. In that pivotal moment, the shadows recoiled as if struck, their advances faltering. The eerie laughter began to fade, curling around her words like smoke dissipating in the wind. As Hannah stood rooted in the sanctuary, her children behind her, she felt the surge of energy rise within. It was a reflection of every moment she'd fought for them, every ounce of love that had pushed her through darkness. With renewed strength, she focused on the light from the book. "I want to let you take us," she proclaimed, the echoes reverberating within and beyond. Light surged forward, bathing the church in brilliance and drowning the darkness in a blinding glow. The shadows screamed in anguish, retreating back from whence they came, and with them, the laughter dissipated into whispers, fading away into nothing. As the storm outside began to calm, Hannah collapsed to her knees, heavy breaths escaping her chest. "We did it, we fought." Max and Ella rushed to her, gripping her, tears mingling with heavy relief. "Are we safe, Mommy?" Ella asked, her small voice still trembling. For the first time that night, Hannah smiled, a fragile but potent promise reflecting in her eyes. "Yes, sweet girl. We are safe." As dawn broke outside the church, light spilling through stained windows, Hannah knew they still had challenges ahead. But for now, they had weathered the storm. And as they embraced, hope ignited in the heart of that sacred space, a reminder that love's light could always conquer the deepest of darkness. Now, it's your turn. If you've enjoyed this thrilling ride, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss out on the next exclusive stories we have lined up for you. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and let us know you're here for the wild tales. And hey, we want to hear from you. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about the ending. What would you have done? Finally, don't wait even one more second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Let us spread the thrill together.